The evening started like any other Tuesday at the Riverside Bistro. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors, and the smell of fresh herbs and garlic drifted from the kitchen. Outside, the city was alive with the usual sounds of traffic and distant sirens, but inside this restaurant, everything felt peaceful and elegant. Diana had been working at the bistro for almost 2 years now. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. But life has a funny way of changing your plans whether you like it or not. Tonight, she was covering the main dining area because 2 other servers had called in sick. Her feet already ached from her morning shift at the coffee shop across town, but she smiled anyway as she greeted each table. The front door swung open with more force than necessary. A tall man in an expensive navy suit walked in, flanked by 3 other men who looked equally well-dressed but somehow less confident. The man in the navy suit had perfectly styled gray hair and wore a watch that probably cost more than Diana made in 6 months. His shoes clicked sharply against the floor as he walked, and he moved like someone who expected the world to part for him. "Good evening, gentlemen," the hostess said warmly. "Do you have a reservation?" "Of course we do," the man replied without even looking at her. "Under the name Wellington, and we need the best table in the house. I'm meeting with important clients." The hostess checked her tablet and nodded. "Right this way, please." She led them to a corner table near the large window overlooking the river. It was indeed one of the best spots in the restaurant, with a clear view of the water and the city lights reflecting on its surface. The grand piano sat just a few feet away, its polished black surface gleaming under the lights. Diana watched from behind the bar as the men settled into their seats. She could already tell this was going to be one of those tables, the kind where you had to be extra careful, extra polite, and hope they didn't find something to complain about. She took a deep breath, grabbed her notepad, and walked over with her best professional smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Diana, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man in the navy suit barely glanced up at her. He was busy typing something on his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. The other 3 men looked uncomfortable, exchanging quick glances with each other. "Water," he said without looking up. "Not tap water, bottled, the expensive kind." "Of course, sir. And for the rest of you?" The other men ordered more politely, asking for wine and cocktails. Diana wrote everything down carefully, making sure to get each order exactly right. As she turned to leave, the man in the navy suit finally looked up. "Wait," he said, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your uniform. Is that a stain there?" Diana looked down at her black vest. There was a tiny spot near the bottom where she had accidentally splashed some coffee during her morning shift. She had tried to clean it, but a faint mark remained. "I apologize, sir. I had another shift earlier today, and I don't need your life story," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "I just think it's unprofessional. If you're going to work in a place like this, you should look the part. Don't you think?" One of the other men cleared his throat awkwardly. "Henry, maybe we should just—" "I'm simply making an observation," Henry continued, cutting off his companion. "Standards matter. That's what separates successful establishments from mediocre ones." Diana felt her cheeks grow warm, but she kept her smile in place. "You're absolutely right, sir. I'll be more careful. Let me get those drinks for you." She walked back to the bar, her hands trembling slightly as she filled the water glasses. The bartender, an older man named Thomas, gave her a sympathetic look. "Rough table?" he asked quietly. "Nothing I can't handle," Diana replied, though her voice was tight. She returned to the table with the drinks, placing each one carefully in front of the right person. As she poured the expensive bottled water into Henry's glass, her hand shook just slightly. 3 tiny drops splashed onto the white tablecloth. The reaction was immediate. "Are you serious right now?" Henry's voice rose loud enough that several nearby tables turned to look. "Can you not even pour water without making a mess?" "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me clean that up right away." "Clean it up? That's not the point." He threw his napkin onto the table dramatically. "The point is competence. Basic competence. Do you have any idea how much this dinner costs? How important this meeting is?" Diana grabbed her cloth and quickly dabbed at the tiny water spots. "Again, I sincerely apologize. It won't happen again. You're right, it won't, because I'm going to speak to your manager about this." Henry leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "You know what your problem is?" People like you never amount to anything because you can't handle even the simplest tasks. You're probably working here because you couldn't do anything better with your life." The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She felt her throat tighten and her eyes begin to sting. But she had practice at this. Years of practice at keeping her emotions locked away, at smiling through pain, at being professional no matter what. "I understand you're frustrated, sir. Can I get you anything else, or would you like a few minutes to look at the menu?" One of the other men at the table spoke up, his voice gentle. "Henry, come on, that's enough." She apologized. "Let's just order." But Henry wasn't finished. "I'm teaching her a valuable lesson. If you can't handle criticism, you'll never improve. Trust me, I know about success. I didn't get where I am by accepting mediocrity." He finally picked up his menu and waved Diana away like she was an annoying fly. "Just bring me whatever costs the most on this menu. I doubt someone at your level would understand the difference anyway, but price usually indicates quality. Now go." Diana walked back to the kitchen, her whole body tense. She pushed through the swinging doors and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for just a moment. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't cry. Not here, not now. The head chef, a woman named Rosa who had worked at the bistro for 20 years, looked up from her station. "You okay, honey?" "I'm fine," Diana said quickly. "Just a difficult table. That man in the navy suit?" "How did you know?" Rosa smiled sadly. "I've been doing this long enough to spot them from across the room. Men like that think money gives them permission to treat people however they want. Don't let him get to you." I'm trying not to, but the truth was it did get to her. Not because anything he said was new. She had heard variations of it before from other customers, from relatives who didn't understand her choices, even from the voice in her own head during the darkest moments. The accusation that she hadn't amounted to anything, that she was wasting her life, that she was simply incompetent. What people like Henry didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was the whole story. They saw a waitress with a stained uniform and shaky hands. They didn't see the scholarship student who had performed for presidents and prime ministers. They didn't see the hospital rooms and medical bills and impossible choices. They didn't see the dreams carefully folded up and put away in a box, waiting for a day that might never come. Diana took a deep breath, wrote up the order for the most expensive items on the menu, and headed back out to the dining room. She had tables to serve, bills to pay, and a life to keep moving forward. Whatever Henry thought of her didn't matter. At least that's what she told herself. Diana managed to get through the rest of Henry's table service without any more incidents. She brought their appetizers, their expensive entrees, and checked on them with perfect timing. She smiled when she needed to smile and stayed invisible when they wanted privacy for their business discussion. It was a skill she had perfected over the past 2 years, becoming whatever the customer needed her to be. But as she moved through her shift, her mind kept drifting back to a different life. A life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. 7 years ago, Diana Chen had been 18 years old and stepping onto the campus of the Riverside Conservatory of Music with a full scholarship in hand. She could still remember that feeling, walking through those grand doors for the first time, knowing she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The conservatory wasn't just any music school. It was one of the top 5 in the entire country, and they had chosen her out of thousands of applicants. Her specialty was piano. She had started playing when she was 4 years old, her tiny fingers barely able to stretch across the keys. Her mother, who cleaned houses for a living, had saved for months to buy a used upright piano from a neighbor who was moving away. It wasn't fancy and some of the keys stuck, but to little Diana it had been magic. By the time she was 12, she was winning regional competitions. By 15, she was performing in concert halls and getting attention from music critics who usually ignored anyone under 30. One reviewer had written that she played with a technical precision that belied her age and an emotional depth that suggested an old soul. Her teacher at the conservatory, a former concert pianist named Professor Vincent, had told her she had something that couldn't be taught. She had the gift. The conservatory years were the happiest of her life. She practiced 6 to 8 hours a day and loved every minute of it. She performed in student recitals, then in bigger venues. In her 3rd year, she was selected to perform with the city's symphony orchestra, playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. She could still remember standing backstage in her black dress, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. and then walking out to that grand piano in front of 2,000 people. When she played that night, something magical happened. She forgot about the audience, forgot about her nerves, forgot about everything except the music. Her fingers found every note like they were coming home. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence, and then the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood up. Some were crying. Professor Vincent had hugged her backstage and said, "Diana, you're going to be one of the greats." I know it. That performance had opened doors. Concert promoters started calling. She was invited to perform in other cities, other states. There was talk of a European tour after graduation. Record labels were interested. At 21 years old, Diana was on the edge of everything she had ever dreamed about. And then her mother got sick. It started with fatigue that wouldn't go away. Then the headaches. Then her mother collapsed at work one day while cleaning a client's house. The diagnosis came back like a death sentence, a rare autoimmune disease that was attacking her nervous system. It was treatable, the doctor said, but the treatment was expensive. Very expensive. Diana's mother had basic health insurance through the cleaning company, but it didn't cover even half of what was needed. The medications alone cost thousands of dollars each month. There were specialist appointments, hospital stays, physical therapy, and a dozen other expenses that piled up so fast Diana couldn't keep track. She tried everything. She applied for financial assistance programs, researched charity organizations, set up crowdfunding pages, but it wasn't enough. The bills kept coming and her mother kept getting worse. The decision she made next was the hardest of her life. She was in her final year at the conservatory, just months away from graduation. She had a performance scheduled in Boston, and there were scouts from major orchestras planning to attend. Professor Vincent told her it could be her big break, the performance that launched her professional career. But her mother needed her. Not just financially, but physically. Someone had to take her to appointments, help her when she was too weak to stand, manage her medications, be there during the bad days when the disease made her forget where she was. Diana withdrew from the conservatory 3 months before graduation. She turned down the Boston performance. She started working, first one job, then two, then three. She worked as a waitress, a barista, a retail clerk, whatever she could find that paid. Every dollar went to medical bills and keeping a roof over their heads. Her piano, the beautiful baby grand that the conservatory had given her as a prize for winning a competition, sat in the corner of their tiny apartment. She had sold most of her furniture to pay for her mother's medications, but she couldn't bring herself to sell the piano. Some days she would walk past it and trail her fingers across the keys, but she never sat down to play. It hurt too much. The music world moved on without her. The European tour went to another pianist. The record label stopped calling. Her former classmates graduated and started their careers while she served coffee and waited tables. Professor Vincent tried to stay in touch at first, encouraging her to come back when things settled down, but eventually even his messages stopped coming. Her mother's condition stabilized after about a year of treatment. She wasn't cured, but the disease was under control. She could walk again, think clearly, live something close to a normal life. But by then, Diana was drowning in debt. Hospital bills, credit card statements, loan payments, they never stopped coming. "You should go back to music," her mother would say, tears in her eyes. "I never wanted you to give up your dreams for me." "You're my mother," Diana would reply. There was no choice to make. But late at night, when she was alone, Diana would sometimes let herself remember what it felt like to play. She would close her eyes and feel the keys under her fingers, hear the music in her head, remember the rush of performing, and the loss would wash over her like a wave, so strong she could barely breathe. 5 years had passed since she left the conservatory. She was 26 now, and sometimes she felt ancient. The girl who had played for symphony orchestras and dreamed of concert halls around the world felt like a stranger. Diana the waitress, Diana the barista, Diana the retail clerk, these were who she was now. She had learned to pack away those dreams, the same way she had packed away her concert, dresses and her awards and all the newspaper clippings about the talented young pianist with the bright future. They were in a box in her closet, and she almost never looked at them anymore. The Riverside Bistro was actually the best of her 3 jobs. The tips were decent, the management was fair, and there was something about the place she liked. Maybe it was the grand piano that sat in the corner of the dining room, used occasionally for special events. She had never touched it. never even stood close to it. But knowing it was there gave her a strange sense of comfort. Tonight, as she cleared plates and refilled wine glasses, she caught herself glancing at that piano more than usual. Maybe it was because of what Henry had said, the accusation that she had never amounted to anything. Maybe it was because she was tired of being invisible, of being looked through instead of looked at. Or maybe it was because somewhere deep inside, buried under years of survival and sacrifice, there was still a part of her that remembered what it felt like to be Diana Chen, pianist. Not Diana the waitress, not Diana the girl who couldn't even pour water without spilling it, just Diana, the one who made pianos sing. She shook her head and went back to work. Dreams were expensive and she had bills to pay. The past was the past and there was no point in looking back. At least, that's what she thought until the restaurant manager stepped into the dining room and changed everything. The dinner rush was starting to wind down when Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager, walked out from his office looking worried. He was a kind man in his 60s who had owned the Riverside Bistro for over 20 years. Diana had always liked him because he treated his staff with respect, something that wasn't as common in the restaurant business as it should be. Mr. Peterson walked to the center of the dining room and gently tapped a spoon against a wine glass. The soft chiming sound caught everyone's attention, and conversation slowly died down. "Good evening, everyone," he said with a warm smile. "I hope you're all enjoying your meals tonight. I wanted to take a moment to remind you that tonight is our annual charity fundraiser for the Children's Medical Center downtown." There was a polite round of applause from the diners. Diana felt her chest tighten. The Children's Medical Center was where her mother had received some of her treatment. They had a program that helped low-income families, and without them, Diana wasn't sure how they would have survived. "As many of you know," Mr. Peterson continued, "we've been hosting this fundraiser for 15 years now, and we've raised over $500,000 for sick children in our community. Tonight we're hoping to raise another $30,000 to help fund their new pediatric wing." More applause followed. Diana noticed that several people were already reaching for their wallets and phones, ready to donate. "Now, as an extra special treat," Mr. Peterson said, gesturing toward the grand piano in the corner, "we've arranged for a live piano performance tonight. All the tips and donations during the performance will go directly to the charity." Diana found herself looking at the piano. It really was beautiful, a Steinway grand that Mr. Peterson had inherited from his father. She had dusted it countless times, but had never heard anyone play it except during last year's fundraiser. But then Mr. Peterson's smile faltered. He pulled out his phone, looked at it, and his face fell. The room sensed the change in his mood immediately. "I'm afraid I just received some unfortunate news," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Our pianist for tonight, Mrs. Catherine Webb, has fallen ill. She's been hospitalized with pneumonia and obviously won't be able to perform." A disappointed murmur rippled through the restaurant. Mr. Peterson looked genuinely distressed. "I apologize, everyone. We'll still be collecting donations, of course, but I'm afraid we won't have the live music we promised. I know many of you came specifically for the performance." From his table by the window, Henry's voice cut through the room, loud and dismissive. "Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? Another example of poor planning. You know what your problem is, Peterson? You run this place like it's some kind of family diner instead of a real establishment." Several people turned to look at Henry with disapproving expressions, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "Real talent is rare anyway," Henry continued, leaning back in his chair. "You can't just expect to find someone who can actually play at that level. Most people who claim they're musicians are just amateurs pretending. Why don't you just play some recordings and call it a night?" Mr. Peterson's face reddened, but he maintained his composure. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I think we'll just proceed without music tonight and I can play." The words came out before Diana fully realized she was speaking. The entire restaurant turned to look at her. She was standing near the kitchen door, a tray of dirty dishes still in her hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What was she doing? She hadn't played in public in 5 years. She hadn't even touched a piano properly in months. This was crazy. But something about Henry's words had ignited something inside her. The way he dismissed musicians as pretenders. The way he assumed no one in this restaurant could possibly have real talent. The way he had looked at her earlier like she was nothing. All the frustration and hurt and buried dreams from the past 5 years suddenly rose up in her chest like a wave. Mr. Peterson stared at her in surprise. "Diana, I didn't know you played piano." I used to, she said quietly, then louder. I mean, I do. I can play for the fundraiser if you'd like. Henry actually laughed out loud. Oh, this is priceless. The clumsy waitress, who can't even pour water without spilling it, thinks she can play piano. Please, sweetheart, save yourself the embarrassment. One of the men at his table, the one who had tried to defend Diana earlier, spoke up. Henry, that's enough. If she says she can play, let her try. I'm just being realistic, Henry shot back. Look at her. You think someone working as a waitress has the skill to play that instrument? That's a $100,000 piano. It requires years of training, discipline, and talent. You can't just sit down and bang away at it. Thomas, the bartender, caught Diana's eye from across the room. He gave her an encouraging nod. Rosa peeked out from the kitchen door, her eyes wide but supportive. Mr. Peterson walked over to Diana, his voice low. Diana, are you sure about this? There's no pressure. I don't want you to feel like you have to do this because of what that customer said. Diana set down her tray on a nearby table. Her hands were shaking, but not from nervousness this time. I'm sure, Mr. Peterson, I want to do this. For the charity. Mr. Peterson studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, if you're certain. He turned back to the dining room and raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we will have live music after all. Diana, one of our staff members, has volunteered to perform for us tonight. The response was mixed. Some people clapped politely. Others looked skeptical. Henry was outright smirking, clearly expecting a disaster he could mock. Diana walked toward the piano, and with each step she felt like she was moving through water. The distance between the kitchen door and the piano bench couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but it felt like miles. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. She stopped at her locker first, ducking into the staff room for just a moment. In the bottom of her locker, under her spare apron and her lunch bag, was something she had kept there for 2 years but never thought she'd use. Her lucky bracelet, a simple silver chain her mother had given her before her first major performance at the conservatory. Diana clasped it around her wrist, took a deep breath, and walked back out. When she reached the piano, she paused. She untied her apron slowly, folded it carefully, and set it on a nearby chair. Underneath, her simple black dress and white shirt suddenly looked less like a uniform and more like concert attire. She had always thought it was funny that waitress clothes and performance clothes weren't that different. Black and white, simple, classic. Diana sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. The piano was positioned so that everyone in the restaurant could see her profile. She could feel the weight of their stares, hear the whispers. Somewhere to her left, Henry said something to his companions, and they chuckled. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. The ivory felt cool and smooth under her fingers, familiar despite the years. It was like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in far too long. This is going to be entertaining, Henry said loudly enough for half the room to hear. I'll give her points for confidence, at least. Diana opened her eyes. She looked at the keys, at her hands resting on them, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to play something safe or easy. She wasn't going to pick a simple piece that would let her hide her rustiness or protect herself from judgment. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. She took one more deep breath, and then her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The same piece she had performed with the symphony 7 years ago. One of the most technically demanding pieces in classical piano repertoire. A piece that separated amateurs from professionals, that revealed every weakness and highlighted every strength. The first notes rang out into the dining room, clear and pure and absolutely certain, and just like that, Diana Chen wasn't a waitress anymore. The first notes floated through the restaurant like something fragile and precious. Diana's fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that seemed almost careful, as if she was reintroducing herself to an old love. The opening of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was deceptively simple, a quiet melody that drew you in before the storm. For the first few seconds, the skeptical expressions in the room didn't change much. A few people exchanged glances that said, well, she can play a little. Henry was still smirking, waiting for the moment when she would fumble, when the complexity of the piece would overwhelm her limited skills. But then something shifted. Diana's hands began to move faster, more confidently. The melody built and swelled, and suddenly she wasn't being careful anymore. Her fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that made people sit up straighter in their chairs. The notes cascaded like water, each one crystal clear and perfectly placed. Her left hand provided a rich, rolling bass line while her right hand danced through the melody. And somehow she made it look effortless. The smirk disappeared from Henry's face. The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the music. Forks were set down mid-bite. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing and were now crowding around the door to listen. Mr. Peterson stood frozen near the entrance, his mouth slightly open in shock. Diana's whole body was involved in the performance now. Her shoulders swayed with the rhythm. Her foot worked an imaginary sustain pedal. Her face, which had been so carefully neutral all evening as she served tables and absorbed insults, was transformed. Her eyes were closed, and there was an expression of pure emotion on her face, joy and pain and longing all mixed together. The music grew more intense. This was the part where the piece tested you, where your fingers had to stretch impossibly far, where the rhythm became complex and the dynamics shifted from thunderous to whisper soft in a heartbeat. Diana played through it all without a single hesitation. Her muscle memory, dormant for so long, had awakened completely. It was like she had never stopped playing. Thomas, the bartender, had tears streaming down his face. Rosa was clutching her chest, her eyes wide. Several diners had pulled out their phones and were recording, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The piece built to its first major crescendo, and Diana's hands crashed down on the keys with a force that made the piano sing. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, powerful and triumphant. Some people actually gasped. And then, just as quickly, she brought it back down to something soft and tender, a delicate melody that made your heart ache. At his table by the window, Henry had gone pale. The three men with him were staring at Diana with their mouths open. One of them whispered, "My God, she's incredible." Diana played on, lost in the music. This piece had always meant something special to her. She had chosen it for her big performance with the symphony, because it felt like it was telling her own story, the opening so full of yearning and questions, the middle section with all its challenges and struggles, and the ending, which she was building toward now, full of resolution and hope and triumph. Her fingers were starting to hurt. It had been so long since she had played like this, and her muscles weren't used to it anymore. But she pushed through the pain. This wasn't just about playing piano anymore. This was about proving something, not to Henry, but to herself. Proving that she was still Diana Chen, the pianist. That all those years of sacrifice hadn't erased who she really was. The music swelled again, bigger and more powerful than before. Diana's hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. She was playing parts that would make professional pianists nervous, technical passages that required years of training to execute properly, and she was nailing every single note. An elderly woman at a corner table was openly weeping. A young couple who had been on what looked like a first date were holding hands, completely mesmerized. Even the businessman who had been checking his email throughout dinner had put down his phone and was watching with rapt attention. Henry looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair.
His face had gone from pale to red, and he was staring at Diana with an expression that mixed shock, shame, and disbelief.
This wasn't possible. The clumsy waitress who had spilled water, who wore a stained uniform, who he had dismissed as someone who had never amounted to anything, was playing like she belonged on the world's greatest stages. The piece moved into its final section, and Diana opened her eyes. She looked at the keys now, her gaze focused and intense. This was the hardest part, the section that tied everything together. Her hands crossed over each other, reaching for notes at opposite ends of the keyboard. The rhythm became complex, requiring absolute precision. She played it perfectly. The final crescendo approached. Diana sat up straighter, her whole body engaged. She could feel the emotion of the piece flowing through her, could feel 5 years of suppressed dreams and buried talent pouring out through her fingers onto the keys. Every frustrated moment, every time she had walked past her piano at home without playing, every sacrifice she had made, it was all there in the music. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath, and then, with a series of powerful chords that resonated through the entire room, Diana brought the piece to its conclusion. The final notes rang out, rich and full and absolutely triumphant. She held the last chord, letting it sustain, letting it fill the space. Then silence. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The last echoes of the piano faded away, and Diana sat at the bench with her hands still on the keys. her chest heaving from the exertion, sweat on her forehead, and then the restaurant exploded. People leaped to their feet. The applause was thunderous, almost as loud as the music had been. People were cheering, whistling, shouting. The elderly woman was still crying, but now she was smiling too. The young couple was clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. Thomas was whooping from behind the bar. Rosa had come all the way out of the kitchen and was applauding with tears running down her face. "Bravo," someone shouted. "Bravo!" Diana stood up slowly, almost shakily. She turned toward the audience and gave a small, graceful bow, just like she had been taught to do at the conservatory. More cheers erupted. People were pulling out their wallets, stuffing bills into the donation jar that Mr. Peterson had quickly placed on top of the piano. Others were using their phones to donate online to the children's hospital. Mr. Peterson walked toward her with tears in his eyes. "Diana," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea. That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" "It's a long story," Diana said quietly, though she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the professional waitress smile, but a genuine expression of joy that she hadn't felt in years. The applause continued. People were coming up to the piano now, wanting to talk to her, to congratulate her, to ask questions. Diana felt overwhelmed by the attention, but in a good way. She had forgotten what this felt like, being seen for her talent instead of being invisible. And then she noticed Henry. He was still at his table, but he wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, and unlike everyone else in the restaurant, he wasn't smiling. His face was a mixture of emotions that Diana couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. Shame, probably. But there was something else there, too. Something that looked almost like pain. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. For a moment, everything else faded away. Diana saw him for what he really was. Not a villain, but just a man who had made assumptions and said cruel things without thinking about who he might be hurting. She saw someone who was confronting his own prejudices and not liking what he saw. Henry opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. He looked down at his table, at his expensive meal that he had barely touched, at his business associates who were all staring at Diana with admiration. The applause finally began to die down, though people were still talking excitedly. Diana heard snippets of conversation around her. "Did you record that? We have to share it. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. A waitress who plays like that? There has to be a story there." Mr. Peterson gently took Diana's arm. "Why don't you take a break?" he said kindly. "I think you've earned it." But Diana was still looking at Henry, and Henry was still looking at her. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that everything had changed. Diana was still catching her breath when a woman approached her from the back of the restaurant. She was in her 50s, elegantly dressed in a burgundy suit with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. There was something commanding about her presence, the kind of person who was used to being listened to. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice cultured and warm. "I'm Victoria Cross. I'm a concert promoter and booking agent." Diana's heart skipped. Victoria Cross, she knew that name. Everyone in the classical music world knew that name. Victoria represented some of the most famous musicians in the country. She booked performances at Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, major venues across the world. "I happen to be having dinner here tonight," Victoria continued, pulling out a business card. "And I have to tell you, what you just played was extraordinary. I've heard that piece performed by some of the best pianists in the world, and your interpretation was as good as any of them. Better than most." Diana took the card with trembling fingers. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I have to ask," Victoria said, studying Diana's face carefully. "Where did you train? Why haven't I heard of you?" Before Diana could answer, Mr. Peterson appeared with his phone in hand. "Diana, I don't know if you realize this, but people have been posting videos of your performance online. It's already being shared everywhere. Look at this," he showed her his screen. Someone had uploaded a video to social media with the caption, "Waitress at local restaurant turns out to be incredible pianist." It already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. As Diana watched, the view count kept climbing. "This is unbelievable," Thomas said, coming over with his own phone. "People are calling you a hidden genius. Someone even recognized you. Look at this comment." Diana read the comment he was pointing to. "Is that Diana Chen? She performed with the Metropolitan Symphony years ago. What happened to her?" The words hit her harder than she expected. What happened to her? It was the question she had asked herself 1,000 times over the past 5 years. Victoria was watching her carefully. "Diana Chen," she said slowly, "I thought you looked familiar. I saw you perform when you were at the conservatory. You were remarkable even then. But you disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to you." Diana felt all the eyes on her, waiting for an explanation. She took a deep breath. "My mother got sick, very sick. I had to leave school to take care of her and pay for her treatment. Music became something I couldn't afford anymore, in more ways than one. The restaurant had grown quiet again. People were listening, leaning in to hear her story. I had to make a choice," Diana continued, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. "And I chose my mother. I'd make the same choice again. But it meant giving up everything I had worked for. The performances, the opportunities, the career I thought I'd have. All of it." Victoria nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "And you've been working here ever since?" "Here and 2 other jobs," Diana said. "The medical bills don't stop coming just because the crisis is over." There was a movement at the table by the window. Henry had stood up and was walking toward them. His 3 business associates remained seated, watching him with expressions that ranged from curious to uncomfortable. As he got closer, Diana could see that his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. He stopped a few feet away from her, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. The man who had been so confident and cruel earlier now looked small and uncertain. He started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I owe you an apology." A serious apology. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this moment unfold. "What I said to you tonight was inexcusable," Henry continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I judged you based on your job, your appearance, your uniform. I assumed I knew everything about you when I knew nothing at all. I was cruel and dismissive, and I'm ashamed of myself." Diana didn't say anything. She just watched him, waiting. "You asked me earlier if I wanted anything else," Henry said, "and I treated you like you were beneath me. But the truth is, I'm the one who's beneath you. You sacrificed your dreams to take care of someone you loved. You worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills. And through all of that, you kept your dignity and your talent. I've never sacrificed anything for anyone in my entire life." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "I know money can't undo what I said, but I want to donate to the charity in your name. And I want to help with your mother's medical bills if you'll let me." He wrote quickly and tore out the check, holding it out to Diana. She looked at it and her eyes widened. It was for $50,000 made out to the Children's Medical Center. "That's for the charity," Henry said. "And I'll write another one for the same amount for you, for your mother's bills, for whatever you need." Diana stared at the check, then at Henry. Part of her wanted to refuse it, to tell him that his money couldn't buy forgiveness. But another part of her, the practical part that had been struggling for 5 years, knew what this money could do. It could clear her debt. It could give her breathing room. It could maybe, possibly let her return to music. "I accept your apology," Diana said quietly, "and I'll accept your donation to the charity. But I can't take money for myself. That doesn't feel right?" Henry nodded, looking both relieved and disappointed. "I understand. But please, if you change your mind or if there's any way I can help, let me know." Victoria stepped forward again. "If I may," she said, looking at Diana, "I have a proposition for you. I'm organizing a benefit concert next month for arts education in underprivileged schools. I'd like you to be one of the featured performers. It pays well, and it would put you back in front of the people who matter in the music world." Diana felt dizzy. A featured performance. Real money. A way back into the world she had left behind. "I don't know," she said. "It's been so long, and I have my jobs, my responsibilities." "Think about it," Victoria said gently. "You don't have to decide right now. But Diana, talent like yours is too precious to waste. The world needs to hear you play." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Diana, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you'll always have a job here. But if you want to pursue music again, I'll support you completely. We can adjust your schedule, or if you need to leave, I'll understand." Rosa pushed through the crowd and hugged Diana tightly. "You go play piano, mija," she said fiercely. "You go show the world what you can do." Diana's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw messages flooding in. Friends she hadn't heard from in years who had seen the videos online. former classmates from the conservatory. Even Professor Vincent, her old teacher, had sent a message. I always knew you'd find your way back to the piano. Call me. The donation jar on top of the piano was overflowing. People were still adding money, and others were showing Mr. Peterson their phones as they made online donations. In one night, one performance, the fundraiser had already exceeded its goal by thousands of dollars. Diana looked around the restaurant at all these people, strangers an hour ago, who were now invested in her story. She thought about her mother at home, who would be so proud and probably crying when Diana told her what had happened. She thought about the 5 years of struggle and sacrifice, and how it had all led to this moment. I'll do it, she said to Victoria. I'll perform at your benefit concert. Victoria smiled broadly. Wonderful. I'll be in touch with all the details. Henry stepped forward one more time. Diana, I know I have no right to ask this, but I hope you'll let me buy a ticket to that concert. I'd like to hear you play again, properly this time, as someone who appreciates what you can do, not as someone who was too blind to see it. Diana considered this for a moment, then nodded. All right, but on one condition. Anything, Henry said quickly. Promise me that you'll never judge someone based on their job or their appearance again. Everyone has a story. Everyone is fighting battles you can't see. Remember that. Henry's eyes filled with tears. I promise. I absolutely promise. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, they stopped by Diana to congratulate her, to thank her, to tell her how much her performance had moved them. The videos were spreading rapidly online with thousands of shares and comments. Some people recognized her from her conservatory days. Others were just moved by the story of a waitress who turned out to be a brilliant musician. Diana finally stepped outside into the cool night air, still holding Victoria's business card. The street was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic and the river flowing nearby. She looked up at the stars and felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. Her phone rang. It was her mother. Diana? Sweetheart, I just saw a video that Rosa sent me. Is that really you? Did you really play tonight? Yes, Mom, Diana said, smiling through the tears that were finally falling. I did. I'm so proud of you, baby. But you didn't have to do this for me. You didn't have to give up so much. I know, Mom. But here's the thing. I'm realizing that I didn't lose my gift. I just set it aside for a while. And maybe, just maybe, I can pick it back up again. You deserve that, Diana. You deserve everything. Diana walked home that night still wearing her waitress uniform, but somehow it felt different now. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, and she wasn't just a pianist either. She was both, and that was okay. She was someone who had sacrificed for love, who had worked hard without complaint, and who had never really lost her gift even when she thought she had. When she got home, she went straight to her piano. She lifted the cover off the keys, sat down on the bench, and began to play. Not for an audience this time, not for money or recognition or anything else, just for herself and for the pure joy of making music. Outside her window, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside her small apartment, Diana Chen had finally found her way back home.